All right, I think we're going to get started, and I feel like more people will join us as we go along here. But hello, and thank you for joining me today for this next installment of Special Collections Summer Seminar Series. It's a tongue twister. My name is Liz Riordan, and I'm the Outreach and Engagement Librarian for Special Collections at University of Iowa Libraries. So grab some popcorn, and today I'm going to show you and share with you some of the early films found in the Brinton Entertaining Company Collection. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a film scholar, but I really love early films. The Brinton Collection has so much to explore that for anyone, and I highly recommend it as a collection that even if you just have a passion or a simple curiosity about entertainment history or entertainment history in the Midwest, that you explore this collection. But before we really get into the films, I think we should talk real quick about who the Brintons were. Frank and Indiana Brinton lived in Washington, Iowa. Frank was a businessman, inventor. He's actually pictured here with an airship model that he created. This is before the Wright brothers, for all of you at home. And of course, he was an entertainer, putting on lectures of the Holy Land, showing magic lantern slides and films. And then towards the end of his life, he was the manager of the Graham Opera House in Washington, Iowa. Indiana was a schoolmistress before marrying Frank. Then she traveled with him, showing magic lantern slides and films, and also helped him with Graham Opera House. When Frank died in 1919, Indiana went on to become a savvy businesswoman, buying lots of land in Texas, Florida, and other areas of the United States, traveling extensively. And when she died in 1955, she died a rather wealthy woman. We know a lot about the Brintons and their business dealings because they kept everything. And I mean everything: receipts, journals, more receipts, catalogs they ordered from, even scraps of paper with random sums and notes scribbled on it. And then, instead of getting thrown out, it was rescued by Mike Zoss in Ainsworth, Iowa in the 1980s, and now it resides here at the UI Libraries. One thing in this collection is a notebook that records their performances from 1904 to 1908. The whole thing is digitized and can be found on the Brinton website hosted through the libraries, which you can see the link here on this slide. This tiny book gives the date, town, even the buildings they were performing in, how much the house took, how much money they ended up with, and sometimes other notes about promotions and weather, all on one line, which sometimes makes it very difficult to read. So if we look closer at this page from 1904, we can see that the Brintons were in Charles City for 3 days. That OH after Iowa means that they performed in an opera house in town. The house took 50% of what they made that night, but they still managed to make good money all 3 nights, particularly April 6th. You can see there's a note above the line that says banquet, roller skating, etc. So that's why they did really well. They were part of a larger event going on. But you also see notes on this page like partly free, which is a promotion that they were doing, or cloudy, rainy, cold, things about the weather. And here you really start to envision the audience that was coming to these shows. You get the size of the audience. You have to do a little bit of math because we know tickets were 25 cents because, again, they saved all the tickets. And so when you think about how much money they were making in one night and how many seats they had to fill at 25 cents a head, I mean, that's a lot of people in the audience. But you also get a sense of the kind of weather they were coming out in, where they're sitting to watch these films, even, if they're partaking in other events happening around town during these performances. Now, the Brintons did shows throughout Iowa and parts of the Midwest, all the way down to Texas, as you can see by this map that's also on the Brinton website. But of course, most of the performances were in Iowa, particularly Eastern Iowa. So I want to focus on what the audiences might have looked like. A quick look at census records from the 1900s reveals that Iowa had a population of around 2.2 million at the time. The state was 99% white, many of them descendants from German, Swedish, and Irish immigrants. But at the beginning of the 20th century, there was also an increase of Russian, Italian, and Eastern European immigrants coming to work in coal mines and other industrial sites in the state. And there was also an increase in Mexican immigrants who were coming up to work on farms. Something I really want to stress, though, is that at the turn of the 20th century, almost 75% of the population in Iowa lived in rural areas. That included farms and towns with a population of less than 2,500 people. When you look at the notebook I showed earlier, many of the stops were rural areas. There are towns in that book that, as a lifelong Iowan, I've never even heard of. So the Brintons and other traveling shows like them were bringing a unique experience to somewhat isolated communities that wouldn't typically have access to moving pictures. That's kind of the image I wanted to paint for you before we start looking at these, but I think it's time to have some fun and start here. Okay, so full disclosure, everybody, I picked this presentation topic mostly because I just wanted to show this film. I do not know the proper title of the film or what year it's from because I haven't been able to find a lot about C.A. Giovanni or his performance, and there was no identification when we got the film. What I can tell you is that this is a vaudeville act that at one point was filmed. And you can see that by the theatrical style of the set. It's a painted backdrop and just the matter of performance. This is one of my favorite parts. For those of you who might not be able to see very well, the cockatoo has a little Italian flag in his mouth, and he's marching along. Now, vaudeville acts were particularly popular to film from the beginning of the 20th century until around the mid-1910s. In fact, many silent film stars like Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin had their roots in vaudeville. Don't worry, folks. The bird is okay. Animal acts like this one were known as dumb acts, meaning since they didn't involve dialogue or sound effects or really much of a plot, they were placed at the beginning or end of the show lineup because it didn't matter if audiences were noisy moving in and out of the theater at the time. When films started to be integrated into more vaudeville acts and lineups, they were also placed into these dumb act slots. At least at first, before films started to get more of a plot and began to grow in popularity. So for me, it is easy to see why animal acts might have been particularly popular to film and show. You know, animal acts are going to be really popular with audiences, and you know they work in these dumb act positions in the lineup. Now, when I was doing more research about animal acts in vaudeville, Library of Congress has a collection of American Variety Stage acts. And they have a website where they have this quote on it. The use of these acts stemmed from the fascination at the turn of the century with man's control of nature and the humification of animals. And you can really see that when you explore other collections that have to do with vaudeville or theater. We have the Keith Albee collection, which is digitized on Iowa Digital Library, that I spent 20 minutes just looking at through the manager ledger books. And within 20 minutes, I found 4 or 5 animal acts right off the bat that featured monkeys, horses, dogs, pigs, all sorts of different kinds of animals. So audiences really did cling to these. And now for the grand finale. And that's C.A. Giovanni and his cockatoos. So the next film I'm going to show for you, I was actually able to find a title and a year of this film, if it will play for you. There we go. So Across Brooklyn Bridge was put out by American Mutoscope and Biographic Picture Company. And I was able to find a catalog from this company from 1902 through Rutgers University Libraries. I found this film under the category Railroad, but there was other categories like vaudeville, parades, fire, machinery, all sorts of fun categories you could pick films from. Here's what the film description says in the catalog. This picture is very novel and interesting. It gives the complete trip from the station at the New York City end of the bridge to the station at the Brooklyn end, as seen from the front end of the third rail car running at high speed. The entire trip consumes 3 minutes of time, during which abundant opportunity is given to observe all the structural wonders of the bridge and far distant river panorama below. You can't deny that it is a mesmerizing film, even if it is simple in nature. For an audience who is used to seeing rolling farmland instead of walls of steel, such feats of engineering must have been impressive. There are other films in this collection that just show places or landscapes like rolling rivers, or people just walking in streets or parades. With these, I kind of compare them to travel shows that you see on Saturday morning, a precursor to Rick Steves, if you will. We watch these television shows knowing that we might never get to see these places, but we can still appreciate and wonder at these sites, even if it is from a distance. So now they're getting into Brooklyn, the Brooklyn end here. And now for my last film, I wanted to go with something very different. Here we go. Very different from the other two. This is one of the fantastical or trick films, and it takes a little while to load up here. But this is a film called Wonderful Flames from 1907, and it was put out by Pathé Films. Now, specifically, this film comes from the filmmaker Segundo de Chomin, who is often recognized as the most significant Spanish silent film director. That's actually him starring as the magician slash bugman slash, I'm not quite sure what he's trying to portray here. He got into films through his wife, Julianne Mathieu, who was a French actress with Pathé Films. Now, de Chomin actually started in Barcelona, making his own films and distributing them through Pathé. He then moved to Paris in 1905, where he became the trick film specialist for the company. He was also a pioneer in figuring out stencil coloring of film. So the film that we're watching right now is completely hand-tinted and hand-colored in. Pathé had factories just for coloring film, and they were predominantly done by women. He was also known for his use of stop motion to create tricks in film. And while this film specifically doesn't have a lot of stop motion, if you are interested, Electric House is what he's best known for using stop motion, and is also credited for being the first film to use stop motion as a trick, I guess, for film. Now, films like this are often credited with Georges Méliès, who is now famous for being the magician of early film, which you can see in the book and movie Hugo. And there are Méliès films found within the Brinton collection. In fact, this collection was made famous for having discovered a lost Méliès film, The Three Heads. And you'll often hear folks say that de Chomin is the Spanish Méliès, or others say he's just a Méliès wannabe, which I think is unfair. We have a lot of de Chomin films in the collection, and that could be just because he was more active in film longer than Georges Méliès. And yes, it's true that he did copy some of Méliès's work. Trip to the Moon in 1902 by Méliès became Excursion to the Moon by Chomin in 1908. But it's important to remember that formal copyright for film didn't really exist until 1912. And so when you watch a lot of really early films, like on YouTube or Internet Archive, you're not going to see a lot of credit to those who created the film, but you are going to see a lot of borrowing of ideas. But I think Duchomin was an artist and a magician in his own right. His films, I think, are innovative, technical, and beautiful, just like you can see right here. Here we see where film can really offer something that the stage could not, because here filmmakers could call on the magic of editing to create works that defy logic and reality. And also, based on how many films are in the collection, they were obviously very popular with the Midwest audience here. The rest of this film is a bunch of different fireworks going off. And what amazes me, again, is that this is all hand colored. And so this is 16 millimeter film, which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is about 6 frames per second. And so if you can imagine working in a factory with a bunch of other folks, hand coloring each frame in. Segundo Duchomin's films and others like it created magical and fantastical worlds that audiences might never even dream of, and the Brintons made sure to project those dreams across communities. We can only imagine what these Midwest audiences, many of whom were from rural areas who lived lives built on a routine and who worked up from sunup to sundown, what might they have thought of such fantasies? The reactions we have watching these films today, how similar were they to the audience's reactions watching them from opera houses, churches, or tents 100+ years ago? My family has been in Iowa for 6 generations now, and I can't help but wonder if any of them ever saw a Brinton show. There's something really powerful about knowing I can still enjoy these films, laugh and gasp at the same moments as audiences years before me. Time moves on, but the limelight on these films does not fade, nor the connections that they can offer to the past. So thank you.